think I've got lighting fixed for this one. Roll it. Hey, I'm Kev Mr. and welcome to Power Oversteer, the Will Motorsport show on the ElusiveKev channel. And this weekend we had the Australian Grand Prix, and this program will review that Grand Prix, look at the teams, the drivers, and the weekend as a whole, starting with qualifying. And so to qualifying, and Q1 took place on Saturday like normal, but it was very wet by the end of the session. And after the session, after waiting for a bit to see if it was safe to go out, they delayed qualifying until Sunday morning, so Q2 and Q3 took place then. But firstly about Q1, and it was expected at the back with both Caterhams on the back row of the grid, with Guido van der Garde out qualifying Charles Pic in his first qualifying session in Formula 1. The Frenchman Charles Pic was just outside the 107 percentile by 100th of a second, but of course he was allowed to race. Ahead of them were both Mauritius, with Max Chilton posting a high 1:49 time, but he was beaten by his rookie teammate Jules Bianchi, who put in a low 1:49 to out-qualify him by almost a second. But the benchmark to get into Q2 was a mid 1:47, and on the wrong side of that was Esteban Gutierrez and Pastor Maldonado in the Williams. The first shock of the year, seeing the Venezuelan get knocked out in Q1 and finish behind his rookie teammate Terry Bottas. Adrian Sutil was oh so near that cut-off time. At the front it was Mercedes, it was Nico Rosberg looking very strong in the wet conditions. So did the Toro Rossos at times, and Force India with the rest are up there as well, with Ferrari, Red Bull, as you would expect. In Q2, again it was Rosberg who was right at the front in the Mercedes. Strong showing from him, along with Hamilton up there as well, with Red Bull, Ferrari and Lotus of course getting into Q3 with them. But at the back it was Bottas, the Williams struggling hard in Melbourne in 16th. Alongside him on the 8th row of the grid was Sergio Perez in the McLaren. McLaren struggling really hard as well around Melbourne, and they decided to gamble a bit through the dice as the track was drying in the last 5 minutes of the session. They changed both drivers to super soft tyres. Button came in after a lap, changed back to mediums, and came 4th in Q2. But Perez, he decided to stay out, and it did not work out for him at all as he qualified 15th. Ahead of him were both of the Toro Rosso drivers, with Adrian Sutil in 12th on his return to Formula 1 after a year away, and Nico Hülkenberg in 11th. So that meant in Q3 that we had McLaren, Force India, both Lotuses, both Red Bulls, both Ferraris and both Mercedes drivers. But in the end, the drying session meant whoever was on super softs, whoever could get a time together on super softs when the track drying would get pole, and that man, as we've seen many times in the past few years, was Sebastian Vettel. He got his 37th pole of his career, ahead of his teammate Mark Webber in his home race. So as the Red Bull front row lockout, behind them it was Lewis Hamilton, a great lap in the Mercedes, with Nico Rosberg in 6th. Felipe Massa qualified Fernando Alonso in 4th, with the two Lotuses behind him in 7th and 8th, with Raikkonen in 7th and Grosjean 8th. Paul di Resta 9th, and Jenson Button could not get a lap together. He went out too early on those soft tyres, could only come 10th. So now we've had a look at qualifying. Let's look at the race with the race recap. So the race, and it took time at the normal time on Sunday. There was a bit of rain in the air at the beginning, and it did come down at patches in the race, but it wasn't heavy at all. And before the race we already had our first retirement. Nico Hulkenberg in the Sauber had qualified 11th, but in the systems check before he went out, about 30 minutes before the race, it was found that there was a fuel system issue, and on safety grounds Sauber did not allow him to race, and so it was disappointing for Hulkenberg, who hasn't even completed a lap in the 3 season openers he has taken part in. But at the start of the race, it was all about Ferrari. Felipe Massa went up to second from 4th on the grid, and Alonso went up to 3rd after passing Hamilton round the outside into turn 3. At the front it was Vettel, and he led by 2 seconds at the end of the first lap. His partner on the front row, Mark Webber, again, I don't know what he's done to Kerrs, if he's just upset the Kerrs gods, but he had Kerrs issues in the first part of the race and so dropped down to 7th at the start. But it was Vettel and the 2 Ferraris at the front, and it stayed that way into the first round of stops. Behind them, Kimi Räikkönen got past Hamilton in turn 13 on the second lap and went up to 4th, and so that was the order until the pit stops happened. And those pit stops happened on lap 7 for Sebastian Vettel. Massa came in the next lap, and Alonso and Räikkönen came in on lap 9. But it was Jenson Button, the McLaren, who pitted first on lap 4 for mediums after his super sauce really did not last. He did do 3 laps in qualifying though on them. And so at the quarter mark of the race, it was Adrian Sutil in the Force India who started on mediums as he qualified outside the top 10, and so he led the race from Vettel and the 2 Ferraris. Räikkönen was in 5th, and Sutil was a part of a select group who had not pitted, including Perez in the McLaren and Ricciardo in the Toro Rosso out of the top 10. Gutierrez was the best rookie in 15th in the Sauber, and Bianchi was the best of the newer teams in 19th ahead of Pick and Pastor Maldonado, who had just pitted in the Williams. And it was Alonso who blinked first. He pitted on lap 20, with Sutil and Vettel pitting on lap 21. Alonso jumped Vettel and then went past Sutil as he exited the pit lane in turn 1. Massa pitted on lap 23, that left Räikkönen in front ahead of the Mercedes, with an 18-second gap to Alonso and co behind. Then we had the first retirement in the race, with Maldonado beaching his Williams on lap 25 in turn 1 after dipping the rear left wheel on the grass, and so DRS was disabled until lap 27 when his car was finally cleared. During this time, Rosberg retired on lap 27 with an electronic problem, just as Alonso and co were catching him. He pulled off on the exit of turn 3, and it was again disappointment for him as he looked good for a good finish. Then light rain appeared around the halfway mark of the race from lap 29 to lap 31. Around this time, Räikkönen was leading from Hamilton, with Alonso and co about 17 seconds behind the Finnish driver up front. Ricciardo from the back, he had problems early on, but he's up to 9th on his, it seemed like a 2-stop strategy. And so around the light rain appeared, and then Alonso appeared in Hamilton's mirrors and went past him on the inside into turn 14. This was after Alonso got a great run out of turn 12, and Hamilton locked up really hard into turn 13 on the inside, so Alonso just cut back underneath him, and that meant Hamilton pitted at the end of the lap with those really bad, almost 50-cent piece tyres there. And with Alonso unleashed, he started setting fastest laps in the low 1:30 range. But it was Räikkönen who made his final pit stop on lap 34 and came out in 5th, 5 seconds behind Massa, but 20 ahead of Hamilton. And then Massa pitted on lap 36 after being stuck behind Sutil for clear air. Vettel pitted the next lap and came out in 5th behind Hamilton but ahead of Massa. Alonso pitted on lap 39 from the lead as Vettel DRS'd Hamilton before turn 1. And then light rain appeared again on lap 40 according to Button's team radio, but it didn't last long at all, wasn't heavy at all. So around the 3/4 mark of the race, it was Mercedes who switched to plan B for Hamilton and pitted him at the end of lap 42 for mediums. Raikkonen had passed Sutil for the lead into turn 14 after making him defend into turn 13. It was Alonso who was setting the fastest laps though in the mid 1 minute 29 range, and then Alonso soon after DRS Sutil around the outside before turn 3 on lap 46. And then he came up to the battle for last between Max Chilton and Guido van der Garde and Marussia and Caterham respectively. It was a quite great battle, and Chilton made his way past van der Garde into turn 1 around lap 50 and then pulled away, and he had about a 20-second gap to the Caterham driver at the end. Sutil pitted at the end of lap 46 for Supersoft and came out in 5th. But soon after, Hamilton dived down the inside of Sutil into turn 8 after harassing him for the most part of the lap. And soon Webber made it past the Force India driver into turn 13 after taking a look into turn 11. And so Sutil was suffering really badly with rear tyre graining, I think it was, on his left rear particularly, as you could see on the TV pictures. But it was Raikkonen who was out in front, and Alonso was only really catching by a few tenths per second until Raikkonen set the fastest lap of the race on lap 15 with a 1:29.2, and that kind of was game over. And so Raikkonen won the race from Alonso by over 12 seconds, with Vettel a further 10 seconds back in third. Massa came fourth, another 10 seconds behind Vettel, with Hamilton in a lonely fifth, or it seemed lonely for a time, until Webber was right behind him at the end. So a good recovery drive from Webber into 6th. Vettel got 7th, just ahead of his teammate the rest. Button was in 9th and was getting caught by Grosjean, Perez and Verne near the end, but it was Grosjean who was under pressure from Perez after the McLaren driver passed Verne on lap 55 and took a look at Grosjean into turn 3 on lap 56, but in the end Perez couldn't grab the final point. Gutierrez was the best of the rookies in 13th in the Sauber after being caught heavily by Bottas in the last few laps, but just held on by a few seconds. Bianchi came in an impressive 15th, a minute down on Bottas, but only a lap behind. Quite a great job from him, especially as the other 3 newer teams with Pick, Chilton and van der Garde were lapped twice. And so that is all the finishes. That was a quick recap of the race. Let's look at who were the winners and losers of the Australian Grand Prix. So the winners and losers, well, the winner of course was Kimi Raikkonen, and notice it seemed to kind of hoodwink Ferrari and Red Bull in that race with their 2-stop strategy, and Raikkonen didn't really come into play until around lap 20. He was just hovering behind those top 3, with also Sutil taking a bit of a role there as well, and so he was just hovering there, and he just pulled out the lap times when he needed to, and he just basically controlled his pace throughout that race and controlled his race perfectly, and in the end he's, I said, just won by over 10 seconds, and so it was just great drive from Raikkonen and Lotus. With it appears they can look after these tyres really well, and Ferrari, they again a bit of a winner there with Massa out qualifying Alonso there in qualifying, but in the race they were very even in pace it seemed, but Alonso was putting out lap times in the second half of the race, but it wasn't enough to catch Raikkonen, but it was enough to beat Vettel. It was a good strategy from a Ferrari to pit Alonso early on in that race around lap 20 before Vettel, and so he managed to jump him with that extra and undercut him. Massa, he kind of had his strategy messed with a bit as they were unsure about going with the 2-stop and 3-stop it seemed, and in the end they went with the 3-stop, and in the end it just didn't work out for Massa and maybe cost him a podium in the end. And I think Hamilton, he was ecstatic with that race, or very happy with that race it seemed after the race, but 5th place, I think that was about right for him, and it's disappointing that Rosberg, I think, a bit of a loser in this race because he looked like he's going well before the time with electronic problems. And other losers this race, I would say, Toro Rosso. They really should have got points with Verne, and I think Verne just messed it up a bit near the end. He did do a faster lap around lap 45, I think, after he pitted, and he looked like he was really catching the McLarens in front, and then Perez got past him in the end. He looks like he just blew his tyres, made a couple of mistakes as well, and so really missed out on points there. And Ricciardo had problems early on. And I said around halfway mark he was in ninth and doing quite well, it seemed, on his two-stop strategy, but in the end it was just a broken exhaust, and he retired around that 40, I believe. So, you know, it wasn't the best race for Toro Rosso, even though it looked like it would be in qualifying. If it was very wet, they were both flying, Ricciardo and Verne. And other losers, I think Sauber, I think with Hulkenberg they might have done quite a good job, but you know, he retired before the race even started with a problem they didn't really understand. It seemed like it's the first time that problem had ever occurred to them with this fuel system issue, and so hopefully it'll be done by the time they go to Malaysia. Who have understood it and would have fixed it. And Gutierrez, he was occasionally in the top 10, but that's due to strategies, and he never really showed solid pace. In the end, as I said, he was being captured by Bottas on presuming fresher tyres for the Williams driver, and so Williams, again, they were losers as well. They just did not have pace here at all. I mean, Maldonado out in Q1 and nowhere in the race. He was behind Bottas for most of the race, I think. So, yeah, it was not a good race at all for Williams, and they've got lots of work to do in these flyway races just to be battling for points, let alone, you know, getting into Q2 as well, being solidly into Q2. And so it seems like it's going to maybe be a battle between Gutierrez and Bottas and Maldonado and occasionally Toro Rosso to get out of that Q2 zone. They'll be in that Q1 zone for those two spots, along with the four newer teams. And one of the winners was Marussia, one of the losers was Caterham, and in the perceptive battles, you know, Bianchi beat Pick, and it seemed like Chilton in the end finally got past Van der Garde and pulled out a gap at the end. And Bianchi was very impressive, you know, only finished a lap down. I think it's one of the few occasions Marussia finished a lap down in a race, and that's without a safety car at all, without any major stoppages. Only that yellow flag for Maldonado in the first turn, saving DRS a bit there in the middle. That was the only really things that could have cost any time in that race. But yeah, it was a great race from Bianchi, very impressive, out qualifying Chilton by almost a second and finishing a lap ahead. So you can't really ask much more from him on his debut. And that goes to our rookie of the race, our driver of the race, and our team of the race. Let's go to those awards. And so, driver of the race, as I just talked about, Bianchi, very impressive in the Marussia. You got the two Ferraris as well with Massa and Alonso. I think they did the maximum they could. Vettel, of course, getting pole and getting a podium. I think that was perhaps the maximum he could have got with that Red Bull. Webber for his recovery drive to sixth as well. Hamilton in the Mercedes getting a top 5 on his debut with the team. That was pretty good in qualifying in third. But I think there's only one option for driver of the race, and that has to be Kimi Räikkönen in the Lotus, and he won that race by just managing his strategy superbly. And he seemed like Lotus, as I said, maybe hoodwinked Red Bull and Ferrari. I mean, they pitted on the same with that 9 pitted early on those supersofts, and then just went with mediums for the rest of the go, and it seemed like they just managed to manage that strategy perfectly for the rest of the race and managed to get an impressive win in the opening race of the season. And yeah, I think Raikkonen had a few different parts of Grosjean as well, and so that might explain why Grosjean kind of struggled a bit in 10th. But yeah, it doesn't really take anything away as we look at team of the race as well, and I think I'll have to give it to Lotus as well, because as I said, it doesn't really take anything away that Grosjean finished 10th. I think he had, as I said, maybe some older parts and maybe kind of just struggled a bit, it seemed, with setup as well, and so he did get 10th, he did get a point in the end. But I think for the strategy of getting Raikkonen that win, I think they deserve team of the race ahead of Marussia with Bianchi, who managed to do a superb job, with Ferrari as well with those curve start, amazing curve start. It's like when I think Benetton on Renault, you know, they got on top of launch control in the early thousands when it came back, and they just got electric starts as well, getting a couple of places. These starts from Ferrari just remind me of that, where one team has really got on top of this system and really got on top of these start procedures that are in place now. And it seems like Ferrari have really got on top of that, and it seems like any time they start, they're going to gain a couple of positions at the start. And I think Mercedes did a good job as well, with Hamilton getting a top 5 as a maximum. Of course, Force India as well, getting 7th and 8th, a double points finish. Good strong start to the season there. Battle for the midfield, battle for 6th, I believe they're going to have. And Sottil, of course, leading a couple of times in the race, leading his laps, and of course I should have considered for drive of the race as well, but yeah, leading a few laps for the first time in his F1 career as well, on his return to F1 over a year away. That's very impressive from the German, and he just outraced the rest of it seemed, even though they had different strategies and they kind of merged at the end, it just didn't work for them on the super softs, and that's maybe why Force India don't really win team of the race for this race, because that strategy for Sottil in the end kind of maybe didn't work out with the super softs, but it did give him clean air, and that's why it kind of worked in the first half, because he had lots of clean air and he could just go as far as he could, and he was really impressive in that he did lap as well as Vettel and co. He had over a second gap, I believe, before he pitted on lap 21, so he really did a great job there in early parts and did an impressive job throughout the race. And rookie of the race, so the final award, and I think again there's only one winner really. That's got to be Bianchi in the Marussia. He did an impressive job in that Marussia, and only finishing the lap down, he really just drove loads of qualifying laps, it seems, in that Marussia, compared to the rest of the newer teams in Pick, Chilton and Van der Garde. They were just on a different level from Bianchi. He just seemed to be on a different level to those three, and so it looks like Marussia have got a bit of an ace in their hole with Bianchi maybe for the rest of the year, and that could really mean they get 10th place ahead of Caterham. And Caterham, they have had trouble in testing with reliability, and at least both cars finished, I guess, for them in the end, and it looks like they're just down on pace a bit to Marussia as well. As Marussia, got curves for the first time, it's good seeing that they made it, both cars made it through the race, as they get used to curves as well. And so maybe, I thought that'd be the best battle on the grid. Maybe it looks like it's going to be one-sided with Marussia staying ahead of Caterham there. And so the other rookies as well, we got Bottas, who out-qualified Maldonado, out-raced him until Maldonado beached it as well. And so Bottas, very solid debut from him, and if only Williams can get a better car for him, maybe he'll be challenging for points in the near future. Maybe we'll have to wait until the European season from Spain onwards for that to happen. But Bottas, very solid debut from him. Gutierrez, best rookie in 13th, a few seconds ahead of Bottas. He did quite a good job as well in the Sauber, the only Sauber in the race, and it seemed like he occasionally got up there towards the top 10, but that was on strategy side. He just seemed to be in his own race, it seemed, for most of it, and so can't really tell much from Gutierrez, especially as there's no Hulkenberg in the race to tell the difference between the two drivers there in the race strategy. But he just qualified in the Q1 as well. That's a bit disappointing. I think he'd be looking to do much better in Malaysia and be betting to get into Q2 and not be that too far behind Hulkenberg, which is a bit of a big ask, I think, as Hulkenberg, I think I rate a bit highly, and I think he'd maybe be like quite a few tenths ahead of Gutierrez, but I think Gutierrez in Malaysia will be just looking to get into Q2. I think that'll just be his aim, and rest of the rookies, Chilton and Van der Garde, well, they had a nice battle at the back in the end, and Chilton got past Van der Garde eventually and pulled away from Van der Garde, but they were way behind their teammates, especially Chilton, way behind Bianchi, and Bianchi's had so much less time in that car, and he had 2 days previously, and Chilton had virtually the whole of testing in that car, so that's a bit disappointing for Chilton. I'm looking to see him step up in future races compared to Bianchi and Van der Garde, I think, as well. I expect them to step up and get closer to their teammates in the races. But it was a bit of a crazy weekend with qualifying and the race on the same day, or most of qualifying and the race on the same day, and I hope that Malaysia is just as good, and I hope you enjoyed this race review of the Australian Grand Prix, and I'll be back with the Malaysian Grand Prix preview later this week. So hope you enjoyed this. I'm up for watching, so till next time, cheerio.